Hey all, Alex here at your home of the Music Deep Dive, and it is time for a record collection recap video. Now, I have done what ended up being a 26-part series on the entirety of my record collection. It was a series that I started back in June of last year and have continued up until the present day. Just released the last edition of it. And during that time, of course, I've collected a lot of records since then. But I didn't what I wanted to do was essentially present my collection as it was, and then recap everything that I bought after the fact, because I thought that would be easier from a continuity standpoint, from a collection organization standpoint, and just trying to kind of make sense of it all. But then, of course, the collection tour took a bit longer than I anticipated, just with a few kind of longer breaks in there. And so we actually have, I think I counted, it's about 38 records that I have to show you. Not actually as many as I thought. I thought it was going to be like about 50, but about 30, yeah, close to 40 records that we're going to be talking about here that I've accrued since June of last year. And there's a lot of really cool stuff in here, and several records that I have had on my want list for a really long time, and some where I'm pretty sure even in the record collection videos, when I talked about that artist, I was like, oh, I wish I had X, Y, or Z, and now we're kind of coming full circle, and it's like, okay, now I have it. So we're going to get straight to it here. I will say this is generically in order of when I bought them. For the most part, I remember where I bought these or where I was. A couple of these came from like some trips that I took out of state. But some I might not have any memory of. We'll just have to kind of dive right on into it and talk. Now, first, I'm actually going to show off, believe it or not, the first 7-inch single that I've actually ever bought. I have a few 12-inch singles, and I have like other forms of media, like I have CDs, obviously. I have even an 8-track. I don't technically own any cassettes, I suppose, but I've never actually got into collecting 7 inches, because I feel like I'm very much a stickler of like I want original artwork if at all possible, and so many of the 7 inches that I see from the artists that I'm interested in don't have them, because they've been lost over time or whatever the case may be. But I did buy this one, and I think it's pretty obvious why. It is the Beatles' Now and Then, the final single, as it were, that came out in November of last year. Of course, I was going to buy this. I think no matter how quality that single was, I was going to own it on some level just because of the significance of it. I did consider getting the 12-inch version, but figured I would stick with the 7-inch. Yeah. Now and Then, I already owned the other two, like, quote-unquote reunion singles on CD, Free as a Bird and Real Love, and then I also own the anthology albums on CD, which featured those records. And, I really wasn't sure what to expect, and I actually did not like Now and Then all that much when I first heard it. If you want my full thoughts, I did a video collaboration with another YouTuber, Tom Williams from Williams Schmilliams. Very long video where we went over all the Beatles singles, including this one. But suffice to say, it has grown on me. It's not one that I'm going to revisit a lot. And I think if you're someone who is not already a diehard Beatles fan and has heard everything for the most part that they've done, you won't probably have much time for this. It's fine. But I think it's a sweet sentiment, and I think it's well done for the most part. And the vocal isolation techniques that they did on John Lennon's voice, I mean, it's stunning. I mean, the quality in the voice and piano and the lack of tape hiss compared to Free as a Bird and Real Love, it's really incredible. And, with the rumors going around that I've heard that supposedly they might be reissuing the anthology records at some point, kind of makes me wonder if they're going to remaster Free as a Bird and Real Love in the same way. We shall see. But I am happy to own that record. Okay. So actually looking at this, I think these are all, yeah, I bought all of these actually in August, this next set. So we're already jumping all the way to August for the first actual records. I was up in Portland, Oregon with a good friend of mine. Stayed there for about a week. It was a great time. And we went to a record store in downtown, the name of which escapes me now. It's very close to the Roman Candle House, the house where Elliott Smith recorded the album Roman Candle. So really, really cool store, really great store. One of the best record stores I've ever been to. And I did get several things that I've had on my list for a long time. And I'm going to start with this. They Might Be Giants Flood. I already owned Lincoln on vinyl, and Lincoln is probably my second favorite They Might Be Giants record. But Flood, really from the moment I heard it, was my number one for so many reasons. I think, some of it might be sentimental because these were a lot of the earliest They Might Be Giants songs that I was exposed to beyond their stuff for children. But I also think it's just the sharpest bit of songwriting that they've ever done. I think there's so much going on in these tunes. Birdhouse in Your Soul alone, I feel like you could probably write a whole paper presentation video essay about. There's so much there. So many hooks. Their cover of Istanbul, Not Constantinople, of course. Your Racist Friend. Hearing Aid. Whistling in the Dark. It's just so much quality material here. And I was so, I wanted to see them tour this live when they came through the Twin Cities a couple of years ago. But I sadly was not able to get to it. But man, such a good record. Such a phenomenal album. I don't know how many other They Might Be Giants records are really easily available on vinyl now. One that I've wanted to get, that I own on CD, but I don't think they ever released it on LP, was The Else from 2007. That one I think is super underrated, and is absolutely up there with my favorite stuff they've ever done. But we'll see. Maybe they'll re-release it someday. Okay, the Paul Simon Songbook. Debut record technically by Paul Simon. This essentially serves as a demos record for a lot of songs Simon wrote while he was in England or before he moved to England. The vast majority of these ended up being recorded by Simon and Garfunkel later on, because at the time they had broken up. And then when The Sound of Silence became a surprise kind of college radio hit in the US, the two kind of got back together and then proceeded to record basically the rest of their discography, many of which, like I say, appear on this record. And it's just, some of them don't even differentiate that much from the actual studio versions, like Kathy's song. It's such an intimate track in the Simon and Garfunkel version that there's the production's brighter on that version compared to this one, but that's one of the only major differences. I really like The Side of a Hill, which is a song that is technically not considered a Simon and Garfunkel song, but they would interpolate it into the song Scarborough Fair, off of Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme. I think that one is really lovely. And yeah, it's a really nice album. Kind of an obscure piece that I think has been uplifted a little bit more with the success, obviously, of Paul Simon's solo career. And I'm really glad to own that now. All right. Björk, Vespertine. Hard to say. I think this is probably my favorite Björk record. I think it is the lushest thing that she has ever done. And I think not to say at all that I am impartial to her more kind of abrasive and more obviously eccentric material that she does in Homogenic, for instance. But this record feels like a cocoon has been draped over me as I listen to like the ideas that she is formulating here. Hard to pick a favorite song, probably Pagan Poetry, which I think is a lot of people's favorite. But um, yeah, Björk is someone who I'm really glad that I've been able to add a couple of records of hers to the collection over the last year and change or so. And I think Homogenic and Debut are are both pretty reasonably priced and are pretty accessible. So I'm sure I will pick those up kind of as time goes on. But love that stuff. And such a consistent artist too. Like really doesn't have much that I would go back to and say, no, I'm not really a big fan of this. Even her, I don't know, like Biophilia or something like that, or a record that I'm not as crazy about. I still think the craftsmanship there is pretty next level. So really one of the highest like floor artists that, to use like a sports term, I suppose, that maybe there's ever been. And speaking of that, David Bowie, Low, probably my second favorite David Bowie record. And this one and Heroes are they're interchangeable, but they're not. Low, I think, Heroes, I think, really thrives on the strength of its like actual like rock songs on the first side. Low just kind of feels like this is Bowie at his most experimental and really delving into the sound architecture side of things, him and Eno, obviously. And, side one is so consistent. There's a through line from this to Station that I think people disregard a little bit. They believe that Low is like this entirely different departure. And I actually think the songwriting on some of these tracks on side one transitions pretty smoothly from some of what he was doing on Station to Station. But there's no doubt it is a very different atmosphere in a lot of ways. And side two, I think, is just some of the best ambient music you will find anywhere. So yeah, I think this was the first Bowie record I listened to after I got into Black Star. It was either that or Ziggy Stardust. But Low was the first one that I listened to, and I was like, okay, I really dig this, even though I don't really understand what's going on. And I've been trying to, it's been on my list for years to get that, and I finally bit the bullet and did it, and I'm really happy that I did. All right. Cocteau Twins, Heaven or Las Vegas. Man, perfect record. This is the only Cocteau Twins record that I've heard at this point. And I don't know if it's a lack of curiosity because I'm just so satisfied with what we have here that has prevented me from exploring their other stuff. That's not an excuse. But yeah, the sound of this record, there are a few albums that I think, with Vespertine being, I think, one of the other ones that make me feel this like satisfied from a production standpoint. Cherry Colored Funk, Heaven or Las Vegas, Fatsa Politic, Frou Frou Foxes and Midsummer Fires. I mean, there's so, the sheen of this record and the vocals on it too are another big piece that I think makes this one of my favorite albums, certainly of the last like 10, 15 years of the 20th century or something like that. And so I ran into this and I was like, yep, I definitely need to pick that up. It's an absolute 10 out of 10 for me. Really love it. Okay. Iron and Wine, The Creek Drank the Cradle. First record by Iron and Wine. I also own The Shepherd's Dog on vinyl, which is probably my favorite Iron and Wine record. I did re-listen to their stuff not too long ago, and I think this record has probably slipped to third on my list of favorite Iron and Wine albums. But it's not from lack of trying. This is a very It's as lo-fi as anything he's ever done. Like Our Endless Numbered Days is very intimate and quiet, but this is, again, it's like tape hiss. It feels like, you're listening to someone singing into a tape recorder throughout the whole time. And it's, like I said, it's very different because after that, he kind of gets into these warmer soundscapes that are very rooted in Americana themes. And this feels more like the more, what do you want to call it, rootsier, folkier sides of Americana that are kind of coming out here. But stuff like Lion's Mane, Bird Stealing Bread, um, Upward Over the Mountain, and Weary Memory, I think, he's a very expressive guitar player. And I don't think this is him. This is a gestational record, I suppose. Like you really enjoy what he's doing here, and you see how that has the potential to build into something more. Like I don't think this would work. I think if it was like an individual statement, Iron and Wine just releases one album, it's really good. It's probably one that you go back to and be like, yeah, that's one of the most underrated records of the early 2000s or something like that. But I think it works even better when you see what it is building to and what he would later do on records like Shepherd's Dog. And then this is an album that I actually haven't heard yet, but I've heard a lot of excellent things about, and for $5, I figured like I would take the chance here. That is Van Morrison with St. Dominic's Preview. I really like Astral Weeks and Moondance quite a bit, but I have not really explored any Van Morrison apart from that. His discography is one that is a little bit intimidating to tackle, kind of Neil Young-like in how immense it is, and how much you kind of have to accept Van Morrison's idiosyncrasies in addition to that, especially when you get later on in his career. I think Van Morrison has become a little bit of a controversial figure in the last few years, especially. He's always been mercurial. He's always been someone who I think a lot of people believe to be a dick, but especially in kind of the COVID years when he released the latest record project, Volume 1 album, that everyone was making fun of at that one point. I mean, he's kind of turned into a curmudgeonly old man. But the snippets that I have heard of his other stuff, of some of his like later stuff from like the 80s and even the 90s, interests me a lot. And his general background and like what he's doing on Astro Weeks and Moondance, like I'm sure, especially the Astro Week stuff, like I'm sure you're not going to get that in a lot of Van Morrison records, but I'm curious to see kind of how his musical influences spread out over his career. So very interested to explore him more one day. And then my first REM record, Automatic for the People, because of course it is. This is my favorite REM album, I would say. Life's Rich Pageant is really close. But Automatic for the People, I think, has, I think it's a combination of, I like the production on it more. And even if you could argue that, yes, REM is maybe, could you argue that? Could you argue that REM is like more quote unquote commercial at this point and they're making more radio friendly songs? I feel like REM was always like very kind of hook centric. I feel like they always had a very sharp pop sensibility. So I don't think it's very fair to criticize this record for that. I'm very partial. I'm partial certainly to the hits on here, like Everybody Hurts and Man on the Moon. Those have not been overplayed for me, but I'm also very partial to Try Not to Breathe. I love that song quite a bit. So, yeah, excited to explore the REM, to expand the REM collection. I've heard all their stuff, but excited to own more of them on vinyl, as I think I own about half of them on CD now. Okay, a few records that I picked up at just kind of random stores like Half Price Books or whatever. Oscar Brown Jr., Sin and Soul. Man, this is such a... I listened to this when I was doing what was going to be like a deep dive of like 50s and 60s music, um, which I made a decent bit of progress on, and I got to explore a lot of jazz music as a result of that. And this was a record that I had not heard anything about until I listened to it. And when I listened to it, I was just kind of gobsmacked at how good it was. Um, it's Yeah, I don't know. I think I love the mixture of vocals and instrumental jazz here. Again, when you kind of get into that, where is the line between vocal jazz and like vocal pop? You know, like for instance, Frank Sinatra toes the line a little bit, but I would lean more towards he's a vocal pop singer. Um, but this is vocal jazz. This is like sharp instrumentation. This is great vocals. Um, and it was one of my favorite. This is a 1973 repressing, I believe, but this is one of my favorite records from 1960, is I believe when this came out. I think it was my second or third favorite album of that whole year. So if you've not heard any Oscar Brown, I think I heard the record after this, which is also very good. But if you've not heard any Oscar Brown Jr., I would highly recommend it. Okay, songs of Leonard Cohen, of course. Yeah, I was overdue for getting another Leonard Cohen record because I think I only had You Want It Darker before this. His debut, I mean, it's excellent for a reason. It is very subdued, as many Leonard Cohen records are, unless your name is Death of a Ladies' Man, of course. And yeah, again, it's kind of like the Paul Simon songbook, where it was meant to be a showcase of his songwriting, I think, more than anything else, and to help market him as a songwriter. And then people were like, hey, you can perform. Why don't you go and perform? And the rest, of course, is history. You know, Suzanne and So Long Marianne, of course, are the biggest hits on here. And I think, you know, they stand out for a reason, but I think everything on this record is really strong. Already, Cohen's ability as a lyricist to conjure up imagery is well ahead of a lot of his contemporaries, because he's obviously a very experienced poet at this point. He's also older than a lot of folk artists at this point, which I think gets a little bit overlooked. Like, he's already about close to 35, I think, when he releases this record. You know, close to like 10 years older than people like Bob Dylan and Paul Simon. So he's got experience on his side, a little bit of like trial and error and things like that. And he's had time to refine his craft. And I think that shows itself as well. So excellent album. Really glad to finally own that. Jazz record, Clifford Brown and Max Roach. Clifford Brown, kind of one of the great what if stories, I think, of jazz. He only released a few records before he died. And Max Roach, Max Roach had a very lengthy career. Kind of delved into played with a lot of different jazz artists, released a lot of kind of groundbreaking records, either on his own or in tandem with other people. But this is very early in the LP era. This is 1954. And actually, when I was doing the deep dive that I was mentioning earlier, this was one of the first records that I ran into that really jumped out at me. Because, yeah, I think Brown is an excellent trumpet player. Roach's drumming is fantastic. You have a great supporting cast here with Harold Land and Richie Powell and George Morrow supporting. And yeah, it's sharp. It kind of leaps off the speakers a little bit. And, you know, having listened to that and contrasting that with like the Miles Davis recordings that had been made up to this point, even including Birth of the Cool. And I understand that Miles Davis is very much, I think, in a different sphere than Clifford Brown in some ways. I think if Brown had survived, I'm not saying that Miles Davis's overall legacy would be gone or severely different. But you do have to wonder whether or not like Davis would be considered as much of a groundbreaking player as he was if Clifford Brown had survived and continued to make records of the quality that he did, which he was consistently doing until he died. And Davis himself, I think, has expressed similar sentiments as far as how much he respected Clifford Brown. So, yeah, fantastic stuff. Okay, this is a hell of a find. This is really cool. So, I've kind of tried to build up my Beatles collection in a few different ways, and I've actually accrued some very interesting stuff over the last few months. This one, however, was just a total random find that I never really expected to see. And it's not the most rare, it's not the rarest thing in the world, but still just to have it, I think is wild. Beatles live at the Star Club in Hamburg, Germany in 1962. If you're not familiar with the Beatles in Hamburg, essentially, the Beatles went to Hamburg, I think 5 or 6 different times over 1960 to 1962. And it was in Germany where they played very long hours overnight in these red light district clubs and very shady environments. And it was in Germany where they built their reputation, where they really honed their skills, and went from being kind of just another rock and roll skiffle band to being the best band in Liverpool, and then eventually like the best band in Europe. So their time in Hamburg is very significant to them from an historical standpoint. These recordings are from the last time that they went in December of 1962. At this point, they are already starting to gain recognition across all of England. They have a song that's in the charts, and they're very much like they were checked out at this point. So this is probably not a recording that's representative of the best that they sounded, but it's still wild to have these like really shitty recordings. Here's the gatefold. Because yeah, this is really low quality stuff. It's essentially a bootleg. But it's wild to have this preservation of the Beatles before the Beatlemania days, like what they sounded like as a live act. This is very hard to come by. And, you know, there's been all sorts of talks. Again, another rumor that's gone out about Peter Jackson with his, isolation software that he used for Now and Then, that he's going to remaster the Star Club tapes with the same software. Very possible. I'm not really sure. I think this would be even more of a challenge than Now and Then was. But I would be curious to see what like the end results are and if this ever gets officially released. I don't know that it will. And I think if it does, it might be until after the surviving Beatles die. But yeah, it's a wild recording. And there's some, even with the little bit that you can actually make out because of how bad the tape is, you can still hear how energetic it is. Like their performance of Long Tall Sally sounds like a proto-punk song. I'm not even exaggerating. All right. So next up, I have to set these to the side here. Okay. These are records that I spent quite a bit on. Not as much as I could have, but I am just beyond happy to own these because these records were significant in the development of me as a music fan and as a Beatles fan. And I'm talking about the anthology records. I was able to find and purchase all 3. These are some of the most expensive records that I've ever bought. I don't remember the exact price offhand because there was also like a shipping charge because I tried to get all 3 together. But yeah, not cheap. These are all, I believe, 3 LP sets. Because the original CDs were 2 CD sets. But man, yeah, I'm glad to own them. The anthology records, I mean, until the Super Deluxe Edition remasters, the box sets that Giles Martin remixed and helped compile, until those came out, these were the definitive word on Beatles outtakes. the reason these exist was because of the documentary, certainly, but also because of the amount of bootlegs that were going around. This was meant to kind of stifle that. And these were actually some of the first Beatles records that I ever heard. The first albums that I ever got were the Red and the Blue albums, which I do not own on vinyl yet. I'm not that interested in getting the new editions of it, not because they're not cool to have or they wouldn't be cool to have, and I really do like most of those remixes. It's because they're just insanely expensive. But after the Red and Blue albums, it was the anthology records that I was drawn to for whatever reason. I think it's because my parents owned them, again, for whatever reason. But yeah, Anthology 1 is going to be like your earliest recording, so it contains like the earliest recordings they ever did up through the Beatles for Sale sessions. The only thing that I don't like about Anthology 1 is they use interview snippets in the first CD in that set, and then they got rid of the whole interview snippet like concept altogether. I think they were trying to make something that like could serve as an audio representation of the documentary. But then it didn't really work out for whatever reason. I don't know. But point is they stopped doing that, which I think is for the better. Anthology 2. This one contains everything from the Help sessions through the February 68 sessions. So the stuff that produced like Lady Madonna and Hey Bulldog and Across the Universe. A lot of really cool outtakes here. Although I wish there was a little bit more in the way of Rubber Soul outtakes, but maybe that's all. Maybe they don't actually have that much. Maybe that's part of the reason why like we don't have a Rubber Soul box set yet, is because there's just not a whole lot to work with there. But the Revolver outtakes are really cool. The Strawberry Fields. Yes, the Strawberry Fields demo recording and the first take are really cool. The Sgt. Pepper's outtakes are fantastic. I think Anthology 2 is excellent. But Anthology 3, to me, I think is like the crowning achievement of the bunch. This contains the first CD is entirely White Album outtakes, including like a lot of the Esher demos. The demos recorded at George Harrison's house in the spring of '68. Other unreleased tracks. And then the second disc on CD is Get Back and Abbey Road outtakes. And just to hear a little bit of extras from like the Get Back sessions, obviously we have way more now because the Let It Be Super Deluxe Edition plus the Get Back documentary just expanded everything so much. But it's really cool to have that. And it's really cool to own this and to own all the others on vinyl finally. It's literally been something I've wanted for years. And I was able to finally make it happen. Okay, God, we got a lot more to go through. Let's keep going. Slint, Spiderland. Found this one randomly at a Half Price Books again, because you find a lot of those there, I guess, and had to get it. Slint are a controversial band for a lot of reasons. I think it's understandable why some people are not super into them. I, for one, their first record is what it is, but I think Spiderland is a great record, a phenomenal record, and I am pleased to have that. It's very Rate Your Music core, RYM core, if you will, and sometimes I make fun of that, but I also don't necessarily think that's a bad thing either. All right. Pentatonics, the a cappella group Pentatonics. This is their self-titled record from 2015. Pentatonics are interesting. I have like a very long history with Pentatonics that I will not go into. I used to be a big fan of them when I was younger. And I still think they're a very talented group. But admittedly, I think they, for understandable reasons, have pursued the Christmas cash cow very heavily. Like half of the records they've ever released are Christmas albums at this point. This is one of only two where they have tried to do original material. I do think it is the weaker of the two records, but I also have more nostalgia for this one, so I am happy to own it. And yeah, lyrically, there's nothing there. It's a lot of like good imitations of like pop songwriting for the most part, but there's stuff like Water and New Year's Day, Can't Sleep Love that I think are actually like really tight and really solid. So happy to own that. Okay. All Time Low. So Wrong, It's Right. I know someone who kind of got me into them. All Time Low was never like a band I was super into as a kid or anything like that, or as a teenager. But there's some damn good songs on here, like Dear Maria, Count Me In, and Remembering Sunday as well. So, you know, it's emo, but I don't mind emo. I don't have any Panic at the Disco in my collection currently. That I can remember. Maybe this pile will surprise me, but I actually think Panic at the Disco are like a really solid band overall. All right, so my camcorder decided to run out of storage space, so that's fun. But it worked out timing wise. So let's get right back into it with this record from Paul Simon. We have Stranger to Stranger here. Stranger to Stranger is again, a lot of Paul Simon records to me are very close from a quality standpoint. But Stranger to Stranger to me is right up there with his very best. I think the instrumental approach that he's using here, which is very inspired by a lot of like contemporary classical composers, a lot of like minimalist composers. It's one of the most unique approaches that he's ever done, kind of building off of stuff that he did on his previous record, So Beautiful or So What. But it's just one of, yeah, to me, like on a musical, like creative level, this is one of his most interesting releases to date. And I think it is really cool that it exists. And so Stranger to Stranger, yeah, probably top 5, maybe even top 2 or 3 Paul Simon release for me. Really hard to say. But I think it's phenomenal. Phenomenal record. Highly underrated. Frank Sinatra, A Man Alone. I talk about this, of course, in my Sinatra video. There's a couple of other Sinatra records coming up here as well, I believe. But this is a very interesting record. It's a bunch of songs written by the songwriter Rod McEwen, mixed together with some recitations of poetry, also written by Rod McEwen, specifically for Sinatra to read. And I think the ambition of this record, especially given that it came out at a time when Sinatra was doing a lot of like pop crossover stuff, is pretty admirable. And even if it doesn't stick the landing as well as you maybe would hope, I think that there's stuff like, especially Night, like the that I think is the peak of like the poetry here, and the impact of how the words that Sinatra is speaking and the music that accompanies them, that's the peak of how they go together. So, really cool record. Another kind of obscure Beatles pickup. This is something that, again, like I love half price books for records, by the way. If in case you haven't noticed that, if you've not seen the many half price books price tags that I've seen here, I think it's a great place to get records for reasonable prices. I think if you have a store that's in your area in the United States, I think a lot of times their prices for used records are more reasonable than record stores. So definitely a solid bit, but they have started carrying this, and this is the Beatles Decca Sessions from January of 1962. So these are the outtakes from the recording audition that the Beatles did for Decca Records in 1962. They did not pass the audition, as it were. But And it's kind of easy to see why from the recordings because they're very nervous. Paul's voice is very shaky at times. But, again, it's an artifact. It's an artifact. Several of these songs are included on the anthology releases, but this has never been given an official release by the Beatles. So it's really cool to kind of see that here. See, to have this unofficial release kind of in my collection. And with that, I mean, that's a lot of the major like Beatles outtakes and stuff that I own. Maybe if there's a bootleg of like the home recordings that they did in like 59 and 1960, if there's one of those that exists, maybe I'll find that, try to get a bootleg copy of that. That would be really cool. But otherwise, yeah, I feel very happy with where I'm at now as far as the Beatles collecting goes. Robert Johnson, King of the Delta Blues Singers. Another re-release here. This is I don't know. I think this might be every featuring all 32 of his recorded tracks. So originally, King of the Delta Blues Singers was the compilation record that came out in I think 64, if memory serves. And was the record that introduced a lot of British artists, especially to the work of Robert Johnson. And because of that, I think it's gone down as one of the most influential compilation releases of all time. And this release, this double record release, actually combines the King of the Delta Blues recordings with everything else that Robert Johnson recorded. Because he only participated in 5 or 6 recording sessions throughout his very short career. And I think, there's so much that has been said about Robert Johnson. And I do think we should be giving there are plenty of other blues guitarists that I think are overshadowed by Robert Johnson in terms of general popularity, general widespread acclaim, which I think is a little bit unfair, but there's certainly something to be said about how Johnson's guitar playing style very much seems like it's kind of in its own category, and his kind of high-pitched, hollering voice is also distinct for the day. There's a lot of passion in these early blues singers, but there's no one who really cries out in the way that I think Robert Johnson does. And that is part of what makes him distinct, especially when you pair that with his interesting and genuinely very intricate guitar playing style. So I'm really happy to have that. My blues record collection is admittedly kind of lacking, and I would love to be able to find other compilations of other artists as I continue to accrue those. I have a couple of editions of his complete recordings on CD for whatever reason, but I'm glad to own that on vinyl too. Okay, major change of pace. I've talked in my video where I talked about Phil Collins records, and I showed off that I had a bunch of the late career stuff, a lot of which is really hard to find for reasonable prices. And I was really missing one because I had Testify, I had Going Back, both sides, but I was missing Dance Into the Light, and I have now acquired Dance Into the Light. To me, I think this is the best of anything that he did after the 80s. Just from the standpoint of I think it's doing more interesting things. The fact that it's dabbling with world music at all, I think already puts it a step above Testify, and again, the really not great covers that I think Going Back consists of. This is nothing great. And I paid, $40-something for it, which is probably too much money. But at the same time, this is very much a collector's purchase. This was very much, I would like to try to be complete on Phil Collins. I see that this is listed for $40. Normally it goes for $80, $90 or something ridiculous. So really happy to own it. And really happy to have it in the collection. All right. Songs for Distinguished Lovers, Billie Holiday. Great album, probably my favorite Billie Holiday record. I say probably, you'll need to watch my Billie Holiday ranking video to check that out. Yeah, absolutely phenomenal. Really love hearing Billie Holiday with this group of musicians. I think it's the best sounding and best quality pure jazz recording that she ever did. And yeah, it's a phenomenal album, phenomenal record. But yeah, watch the Billie Holiday video for more takes on that. Okay. Frank Sinatra, A Swingin' Affair. Again, watch the Sinatra video if you want to know where I have this in his ranking specifically. But what I will say is, to me, Songs for Swingin' Lovers gets all the acclaim as far as like his best kind of upbeat swing record, and deservedly so. However, I would say A Swingin' Affair is very close to being at the same level of quality. I think there's a lot of great stuff. I think his version of Night and Day is super dynamic. I Won't Dance, I think, is also terrific. Yeah, Sinatra's first couple of like really upbeat records with Capitol are absolutely his best examples of swing. I don't think the arrangements were ever as good as the Nelson Riddle charts that are here, and I don't think Sinatra ever really leans into them as well as he does with these records. So, fantastic album. And then another record by Sinatra, Where Are You? Gordon Jenkins on arrangements. I think this is a lovely album. Some people criticize Gordon Jenkins for being a bit overdramatic and kitschy in his arrangements compared to Nelson Riddle. I'm not saying I don't understand the arguments, but again, I don't really agree with them. Autumn Leaves and Laura are two of the best tunes on here. But again, watch the video if you want to know where exactly I have it ranked in the Sinatra discography. All right. Okay, two more that have been on the wish list for ages. A lot of these recent ones were like online purchases because I had a moment in like September or something where I was like, fuck it, I'm going to get a lot of these records. And two records were just re-released on vinyl this past summer. And I'm so happy to own them now. So happy to pair them with my copy of Fetch the Bolt Cutters. Here is When the Pawn by Fiona Apple, which is probably my favorite Fiona Apple record. I think this takes the strengths of Tidal and builds upon them with even tighter songs. I think this is an angrier record than Tidal is. And yet it still, again, has like hooks and shit. Like Limp is so fucking good. So good. Paper Bag is amazing. Get Gone is amazing. I don't even know what really to say. Like Fiona Apple took the pivot of making these more kind of eccentric records and using more unorthodox instrumentation. You hear that with Extraordinary Machine a little bit, but I think it's really obvious with like Idler Wheel and Fetch the Bolt Cutters. And I still rate all of that stuff incredibly highly. I think Extraordinary Machine is like a strong 8 out of 10 record for me. And I think everything else is 10 out of 10 category. But I think When the Pawn captures a really special energy in terms of how like Fiona was still a very like, you know, commercially and critically viable artist at that point. And I think that's why this appeals to me the most out of her stuff. Also kind of like the minimalist cover here for this Vinyl Me Please exclusive pressing. And speaking of Tidal, here's Tidal. Yeah, another one. I mean, When the Pawn, I like came very close to buying on a couple of occasions over the years because that one at least was like somewhat reasonably priced, like for being someone out of print, like $65, $70. I'm like, whatever, I'll make it work because When the Pawn is that freaking good. But Tidal, I mean, there were times when I'd look at prices and it'd be like $125, $150. So to have this thing being properly re-released is phenomenal. I'm really happy to own this. It is for sure the most commercial and poppiest record that she ever did. Not that that's saying very much. It's poppy in the way that like Little Earthquake's Tori Amos is poppy. But yeah, Criminal, Sleep to Dream, Shadow Boxer, Slow Like Honey, I think are killer songs, some of the best that she ever did. And it sounds great. I think her skills as a pianist are really evident on here. And yeah, it's piercing. And I understand people putting this at the bottom of their Fiona Apple rankings because, again, it is like a gestational record. It is this is not really representative of what she's going to do throughout her entire career. But I think, especially with her being, 19 or whatever when she released this, it is shockingly mature. It is so, I think, fully formed. I think she is so secure in her own identity when she makes this. So, like, you're lost for words at this point. I'm lost for words probably because I've been recording this video for over an hour now, but I'm going to take a drink and hopefully that will help. Okay. We are closing in on the end, though. Another Half Price Books find, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 Deluxe Edition. So this is where I have to say, there's technically more records that I haven't shown yet. I actually do have a collection of soundtracks and whatnot, as well as some classical records. If people are interested in seeing the soundtracks and classical records, let me know. I won't have a ton to say about them for the most part, because a lot of those are actually things that I picked up from other people's collections. There's only a few that I bought with my own money. But I did want to talk about this one specifically because I mentioned it in the video where I was talking about Cat Stevens records. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 was what got me into Cat Stevens. I really like that movie, even if I'm not a huge Marvel devotee myself. And the soundtrack is so sharp here. A lot of, 70s tunes here. That's the focus. So Mr. Blue Sky, The Chain, My Sweet Lord, Brandy, You're a Fine Girl. They even have some older stuff like Sam Cooke's Bring It On Home to Me as well. And then the actual score they include on this as well, 2 LP set. So found this for a decent price, and I was like, yep, I'm not going to pass that up. I'm really happy to own that. Still have only seen that one. I've seen most of the first movie, but in like bits and pieces, and I have not seen Volume 3 yet. So very odd, I know, but such is life. Ella and Lewis. Ella Fitzgerald and Louis Armstrong. I had been doing listening for Ella Fitzgerald to potentially do a ranking video for her. I don't know if that's going to happen yet, because that project did kind of fall off a bit. I will say, though, Ella and Lewis is going to be very high on that list should I ever make that video. It's so fascinating because Ella Fitzgerald and Louis Armstrong are not two people who you would expect to really work well together. They are vastly different singers. Louis Armstrong, of course, has his famous gravel, kind of, barely on key warbling type of singing. Ella Fitzgerald is very bright, and very known for like her dexterity when she's singing. Her scat singing, but that's the thing too, because I say scat singing with Ella Fitzgerald, and Louis can also do that, and that ties into what connects the two of them, which is they are both jazz singers to their core. Again, talked about the jazz versus vocal pop type of thing. These two are jazz singers. They feel the music and they live the music, and they can riff around these melodies in really interesting ways, and that is what makes this work. So many good songs featuring the two of them together here. In their later collaborations, they would do more songs where it was like they would collaborate for some of them, and then there would be others where one would take kind of a solo feature. But this is Ella and Louis together, and it is really damn good. One of the best vocal jazz records of the 50s, and probably of all time. One of my favorite piano-based jazz records. This is Bill Evans and Jim Hall with Undercurrent. Dig the alternate cover for this vinyl pressing here. Bill Evans, pianist, Jim Hall, guitarist. They make one of the best intimate, quiet, and beautiful jazz records, certainly of the early 1960s. I think Bill Evans is someone who, as a pianist, I have always really liked him. I don't know if I've ever quite gone so far as to say he's one of my favorite jazz pianists, or one of my favorite pianists ever, anyways. I've never, for the most part, I have not had that moment where I'm like, this is purely sublime music that really connects to my soul in a way that like a lot of other pianists can. And I feel like that is a very viable thing for a piano to be able to do, because I personally am someone who is very affected by hearing piano music. And so it's something that can certainly strike that intimate chord. And with Bill Evans, it hasn't happened as much as I would expect historically. But Undercurrent is one where I think this does. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful record. And yeah, I've got nothing else to say about it. Phenomenal. And again, an iconic cover. Okay, and then the rest of these, or the next few anyways, are taken from a trip. I had to go to Iowa for work in November, and I picked up some records while I was down there. The first two are very cheap discount records, neither of which I've heard, but I figured I would pick them up for, I think, like $5 a piece. Casey Musgraves, Star-Crossed. Yeah, Barnes & Noble is offloading this for understandable reasons. This was an incredibly highly marketed record when it came out. Like, got a lot of attention, a lot of hype, and then people didn't really like it all that much. And I think a lot of the goodwill that Casey Musgraves had after she released Golden Hour, which was a critical darling, was became a lot more subdued after Star-Crossed came out. I've not heard it yet. I don't have anything really to say about it. I think, actually, no. I've heard one song, and I remember not liking it all that much. But, you know, I think even if it's my least favorite Casey Musgraves record, which it probably will be when I hear it, I think she's a sharp enough songwriter to where I'm still very curious to hear what she does to kind of spin away from that, because I think one of the biggest critiques was that Star-Crossed is very much like Casey leans even more into the pop sensibilities, and I'd be very curious to hear if she considers going into like leaning back into her more country influences after this. This is Sam Beam and Jessica Hoop with Love Letter for Fire. Sam Beam, of course, of Iron and Wine, hasn't really done a whole lot of material under his own name. This is one of the exceptions. Again, this was a $5 record that I figured I would give a shot, because while I have not heard it yet, I am still very curious to. I'm curious to hear him work with Jessica Hoop. And again, Iron and Wine to me is a pretty high floor artist. I haven't really encountered an album that I've thought was even that mediocre. So I think this was a chance where I was like, you know what? I operate from the standpoint of, if I have a strong sense that I'm going to like a record, even if I haven't heard it before, and I see it for a price that's like considerably below like market value or whatever, I'm going to take a chance on it. Because I would rather buy it now for $5 than wait on it because I haven't heard it, then come back to it later and be like, oh, I really like this record. Oh shit, well now I can't find it for $5. Now I have to pay $20 for it. So I operate from that standpoint. Okay. The National, Trouble Will Find Me. Boy, I really got into The National over the last 6 months. Sleep Well Beast was the other record that I owned, and Sleep Well Beast is probably my favorite National record, but boy, Trouble Will Find Me is it's always kind of knocked on the front door, like waiting to come in and take over that title. this era of early 2010s National, where they're starting to um, make their sound a little bit more sedate when they are starting to put more emphasis on like piano and things like that. You hear that start with High Violet, even though High Violet I think is still very ornate and very kind of grandiose in some ways. Trouble Will Find Me, I think, strips things down a little bit. And I really like the approach here. Demons, Fireproof, Heaven Faced, I Need My Girl, Pink Rabbits. Pink Rabbits has been on repeat for me a lot recently. So, yeah, phenomenal record, phenomenal album. One of my favorites of the 2010s, I think, at this point. Okay. A couple of Eric Clapton records are coming up here. From the Cradle, from 1994. Gatefold release here. Take a look at that. Kind of not in like the cover is a little bit like warped in a surprising way. But yeah, From the Cradle. This is a, you know, it's a strong record, man. What can I say? I think what is it? Journeyman, I think, was the album that came out before this one, technically, if you don't count soundtracks. And I like the blues approach on that one, but I think From the Cradle, to me, is even more like aggressive on some levels. Like Blues Before Sunrise is just kind of, it attacks you with that opening guitar riff. And I think this is some of the best pure blues that you will ever hear from Clapton here. Excuse me. And Clapton doing like pure blues is not necessarily like what I want out of him all the time. Like I don't think it has always worked to me, but From the Cradle I think is where he is the most believable, and that is why I think it stands out compared to other records that he has done and that he has released over his years. So a big fan of that. Another Clapton record here. I have Old Sock. I got this because they just re-released it for its 10th anniversary. And Clapton, you know, I used to watch Rock Boy 680, you know, that YouTube channel, if anyone ever watched that. And I mean, it's one of those things where I watched him because I thought his record collection was kind of cool. This was back when I didn't really have a lot of records. So do I think his musical taste was that cool? I don't know. I mean, Joe Bonamassa, late career Clapton, for the most part. But Old Sock is, it inspired me to get into like Clapton a little bit more, like watching his videos. And even if like I think like Old Sock I don't think is all that good of an album, but I still developed like some level of an attachment to it and a desire to get complete on Clapton because I saw his complete Clapton collection. And Old Sock to me is just very funny. I mean, just the cover, the fact that he took it as a selfie, I believe. It's just, can't make it up. The back cover too, if you notice that. Yeah, there's a Paul McCartney collaboration on here somewhere, but I don't remember a thing about it. I don't remember it standing out. Okay, we're down almost to the end here. 3 more records to go. Sufjan Stevens' Javelin. Oh, man. Okay. I don't own that many records from the year 2023 from last year, because I actually haven't heard a ton of them either. But I would say probably the best record that I heard from 2023 was Sufjan Stevens' Javelin. I think a lot of people probably agree. I think everything that went into this album and the context that is surrounding it, Stevens releasing it after his battle with some chronic illness and then the loss of his partner earlier in 2023, I think, you know, because of all those connections, everyone expected this to be the next like Carrie and Lowell. I think that's what everyone like. That was certainly my mindset going into it. But in a way, it's so much more than that because it has the intimacy of Carrie and Lowell with the sweeping productions of your Illinois and your Michigans and the electronic influence of like Age of Odds or Ascension or something like that. And when you combine that with some of the most genuinely affecting records that Sufjan has ever written, and I'm talking like some of these lines are absolutely Carrie and Lowell levels of like, oh, oh my heart, right? It's yeah. I think I struggle to call this his best record ever. I think to me, Carrie and Lowell will always have a place in my heart that's going to be kind of untouched. But I think this is the most definitively Sufjan Stevens record that I think he has ever put out. And I think this represents who he is. This represents his story and his abilities as a musician better than anything he's ever done. And given his importance, given I think his value as a person and as a musician, I think that's a special thing. So, yeah. Favorite song on here? I don't know. It's probably Shit Talk, right? It's probably Shit Talk. Like, that is a gorgeous, like, you want to talk about build-ups, something that I've said before that I am a huge fan of. I think Shit Talk has one of the best build-ups in a song that I've ever heard. And the, like, counterpoint of the different vocal lines, and, like, the lyrics that they're saying on top of each other, it gives you chills. It's wild. Okay, we're going to go back to Eric Clapton, because I guess he re-released this too. This is Me and Mr. Johnson. Released in 2004, Robert Johnson covers record. Of course, Clapton's going to want to do something like that. He is one of those British guitarists that was influenced by King of the Delta Blues singers. Some people are not like big on this. I think this is actually pretty decent, even if it is very much like, this is not Clapton trying to recapture the Robert Johnson aesthetic. This is Clapton trying to recapture the re-record the Robert Johnson song with his own aesthetic behind it. So it very much sounds like a mid-2000s Eric Clapton record that happens to be covering Robert Johnson's song. So you're not going here for the atmosphere. You're just kind of here to like hear this guy pay respects to probably the most influential guitarist on him ever. And I think it works for what it is. We'll ignore the comments that Clapton's made about black people in the past, I suppose. I won't go there for now. This isn't really the forum for it, but decent enough album. And then the last record I'm going to show, the most recent one that I picked up just a few weeks ago while I was doing some Christmas shopping, is Madonna, Ray of Light. Possibly my favorite Madonna record. I don't really know. It's between this and True Blue. And I think True Blue would probably win just by the strength of songs, I think, obviously. But boy, I think Ray of Light is such a, I genuinely think Ray of Light is a pretty daring step forward. And Madonna throwing herself headfirst into a different direction and succeeding spectacularly at it. It is long, certainly. There's no doubt about that. And it is a longer record, and that might be working against it as well. But it captures an intensity and an embrace of what dance music had turned into by the mid to late 90s that I think is something, it's really effective. It's really well done. And again, I find myself just saying I'm happy to own it now because it's been on my list for a while. But to buy it new, generally, you're looking at paying about $35, $40 for it. In this case, I found it for about half that price. So I figured I would jump on it. And that is it. So we have made it to the end. I want to thank anybody who's made it this far. I appreciate you sticking with it, and I appreciate you watching this record collection tour series from front to back. Going forward, I'll be making like record collection haul videos periodically as I add more stuff to my collection. And as far as other types of collection videos, like I said, I think there's still some soundtracks and classical records that I have not shown. So if people are interested in that, I can make another addendum video there. As far as other forms of media, I mean, you can see behind me, I've got a ton of books. I might do a book collection video one day, or a book collection video series, but it probably won't be for a while. CDs I could do, but I have over 1,000 CDs. That would be very difficult to do, and I don't think people are generally quite as interested in that. But if I'm wrong about that, let me know if you're interested in seeing that type of a series. I think if I were to do anything else in the near future, it would probably be box sets, talking about some of the box sets that I have and digging into those a bit. I do have a few of them that I think would be very interesting to show off and get a conversation going. So with that said, I'd like you to let me know kind of what records you got over the last, maybe let's say the last year. What was your favorite record pickup in the year 2023? Let me know in the comments. And with that, thanks for watching. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. More reviews, more videos, as always, are to come. Hit that bell for notifications and tell a friend as well. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time right here at your home of the Music Deep Dive.